what has been even more devastating is that despite that recognition, we have seen no tangible evidence of an improvement in the situation. Like, food has not been flooded into Gaza. There has not been this outpouring of allowing trucks into Gaza.
Welcome to Global Dispatches, a podcast for the foreign policy and global development communities and anyone who wants a deeper understanding of what is driving events in the world today. I'm your host, Mark Leon Goldberg. I am a veteran international affairs journalist and the editor of UN Dispatch. Enjoy the show. The worst-case scenario of famine is currently playing out in the Gaza Strip. That was the conclusion of a July 29th report by the leading global authority on food security, the Integrated Food Security Phase Classification, or IPC. The report found that more than 1 in 3 people in Gaza are now going days at a time without eating. More than 500,000 people, nearly a quarter of the population, are enduring famine-like conditions. Malnutrition rates are skyrocketing, and deaths from acute malnutrition are mounting. This is the direct result of Israel's policy of preventing sufficient food from entering Gaza. Now, as images of emaciated children flash across screens around the world, will that be enough to generate political will in Israel, the United States, and Europe to change course? Alternatively, how much worse can this get? Joining me to discuss the ongoing famine and humanitarian crisis is Jada Doyen McKenna, the CEO of Mercy Corps, a major international humanitarian NGO with ongoing operations in Gaza. She explains why famine has taken hold now, what can be done to immediately end it, and why this crisis is very much at a tipping point. This conversation is obviously very timely, and we recorded it live via Substack. If you'd ever like to join one of these live conversations, please sign up for our newsletter at globaldispatches.org. And while you're there, you can get a paid subscription to support my unique brand of humanitarian journalism. Thank you. Now here is my conversation with Jada Doyen McKenna, CEO of Mercy Corps. Jada, you and I have spoke many times over the years, not just about Gaza, hardly. We've talked about all manner of international crises, which Mercy Corps finds itself involved. But we have spoken over the course of the last couple of years now about the unfolding humanitarian crisis in Gaza, which has been getting only worse and worse. So a week ago today, and we're recording this on Tuesday, August 5th, the Integrated Food Security Phase Classification, or the IPC, which is the leading authority on food security situations worldwide, issued a statement saying that, quote, the worst case scenario of famine is currently playing out in the Gaza Strip. Now, there have been many of these IPC reports that have been issued over the course of the conflict in Gaza, but this is the first one to directly invoke the fact that famine is occurring. What changed?
Unfortunately, this is like the worst case nightmare that we never thought we'd come to. So from the beginning in the conflict in Gaza, food security has always been very shaky. So from the very beginning of the conflict, Gaza was put under siege. So basically, Israel controls almost all of Gaza's access to fuel, to clean water, to electricity. And from the beginning, Israel primarily cut those off, and even sometimes it cut off telecommunications. The other thing that's always been a challenge for us in Gaza, but nothing like it is now, is the use of these deconfliction routes. So normally in any conflict, the UN is the primary person that sets these up, but the IDF has access to all of our safe houses. They know the coordinates of all of our movements. We coordinate them. And so from the beginning of the conflict, we saw it was hard to get in supplies. Gaza was already one of the most restrictive places in the world to get in supplies. So anyone who's worked there for any amount of time already had a lot of experience with knowing what was in and out. There have always been like a lot of arbitrary denials, a real slowness at the border. So from the beginning, we had that, which made us worry about food. And then also some of these deconfliction channels were preventing us from moving around as much as we wanted. So from the beginning, it's always been not enough food has been getting in, not enough trucks, a bit suboptimal. But we were always able to avoid this worst case in these famine scenarios with a lot of pressure. During the ceasefire, we were actually very successful. So we had over 10,000 trucks got into Gaza. The full humanitarian system was up and running, and we were able to serve that population. And even then, at that time, the population had still been getting less than what they needed over time. When Israel decided to break the ceasefire in March, what happened was Israel did a full blockade on March 2nd. So a full blockade of both commercial goods and humanitarian aid. And if you think about it, Gaza is just completely reliant on the outside to get anything in right now. The agriculture that's there has been very interrupted. People are not allowed to fish. And so everything they got was either commercial or aid. So full blockade on commercial and aid goods. In May, that was partially lifted and a new mechanism was set up, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. So it was partially lifted. So these Gaza Humanitarian Foundation and a few other organizations were allowed to bring in limited amounts of things on food. The amounts that have come into Gaza have been far less than even what they were before the first ceasefire. And then what they did was they took out the entire UN distribution system that had about 400 access points for people throughout the territory. And the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation that they set up has 4 distribution centers only in the south, and it forces people to cross over military lines and to make long walks to get the limited supplies that are available there. And so if you are elderly, if you're infirm, if you can't make that march for any reason, you're not able to get that food. So you have a situation where now people have emerged from like weeks of no food coming in whatsoever to very little food coming in. Over 1,300 people have been killed trying to access food at these 4 distribution points that have been set up. So it's not a safe situation. We actually had a story where a participant said like that her children like begged her not to go to that food because they were like, that's where people go to die. And so this lack of food is real. It's felt throughout. The danger and just a sense of hopelessness is starting to set in terms of will there be food available? Is it going to come in? And then prices in the meantime have skyrocketed to 30, 70 times what normal prices were. So if you just think about what these 23 months of experience, people have moved several times. A lot of them are in temporary housing or tents outside, huddled into these small areas. 80% of the strip is considered a militarized zone and shouldn't be inhabited. Little to no food coming in. It's quite dire. The health systems have been devastated to the point where there's not much available. And a lot of things like baby foods and other things that just have not been allowed in. So it's a really dire situation right now.
So Mercy Corps still has operations and staff on the ground. What are you hearing from your colleagues in Gaza today?
Yeah, we still have operations on the ground, and we've been really focused on getting clean water to people. 95% of the water systems have been destroyed. We also, like all of our peers, have other things we've been providing, like food and shelter kits and hygiene kits have been sitting at the border. We've actually had about 1,200 food kits that have gone bad in that time since it's been sitting there at the border.
You said you've had food kits that have spoiled at the border waiting to go over. What happened?
We have about 73 truckloads of food, shelter, emergency hygiene kits that have been sitting at the border.
The Israeli authority that approves aid going into Gaza. And you're saying you have just pallets that were sitting like at the Kerem Shalom, the Jordan side.
And at the Egypt side of the border, so in Kerem Shalom. And we pack the foodstuffs that they have like 12 months of expiration. And we've had 1,200 expire just in the time that they've just been sitting there waiting to be allowed in. We have a lot more to come in, but yes, we still have staff that are there working. Even the water distribution that we're doing, We're serving about 8,000 households and scaling that up. But the desalination plants that we use to get that water from, they also suffer from fuel outages. So sometimes there's not as much available. So our staff is still moving around trying to do its work. And yet at the same time, those same people are worried about where they're going to get food day to day.
So that's what I've been hearing from other humanitarians that I've talked to, is that this is the first time that they can remember in which their staff are also going hungry in the midst of a humanitarian crisis. And you're hearing that for Mercy Corps staff?
We're hearing that. You're like, how are you feeling? How are you doing? And it's like, we're actually really hungry. Staff talk about being down to one meal a day in a good period, right? And that meal is usually some bread, if they can find it, some lentils. They talk about things in shops. Sometimes shops are out of foods, but being really out of reach price wise. We have colleagues who go in and out of Gaza. And one of those colleagues who goes in and out said that she was gone for 3 weeks. She came back. She's like, just in that period, her colleagues had lost visible weight. Like she could see it on them. The other thing she noticed coming in, because, people know the entry points for trucks across the border. She said when they were coming in, she saw like women and children like putting themselves in front of the trucks, like climbing on the trucks for food, right? So you think of these as like looting situations or criminal. She's like, no, it's just hungry people really desperate for food, going to where the food is. Our colleagues also talk about like visiting participants in homes, and just no one has any energy. Like kids don't have energy to play or to do anything. So they're hungry and they're tired. And I think the thing that breaks our hearts the most is there is this sense of hopelessness that's setting in, that's just, you know, feeling like there is no end game here, and just that sense of desperation. And our staff, they do this work because they love it, and we believe in hope and solutions for people. And to hear them start to lose hope and to suffer so much themselves, it's awful.
To what extent has this last week been something of like a humanitarian tipping point? I think it also might have been a political one as well, but I know there's probably sensitivities around what you can speak to politically, so I don't want to put words in your mouth. But from a humanitarian perspective, was that declaration of famine by the IPC, or insinuation that there is famine by the IPC, a sort of humanitarian tipping point to your mind?
It's been really devastating because in my mind and in reality, it is a tragic tipping point. And hunger is one of those things that takes a while to build up. And once people are experiencing acute malnutrition or severe malnutrition, when you start to see it, when the numbers start to come in, it's usually undercounted. And food enough isn't alone. You need medical supplies and other things. So the tipping point is definitely here. And it has felt like in the past week, there has been a recognition of that fact and a recognition that there is a serious problem here. But what has been even more devastating is that despite that recognition, we have seen no tangible evidence of an improvement in the situation. Like food has not been flooded into Gaza. There has not been this outpouring of allowing trucks into Gaza. In fact, I think last week when we checked, there were 3,500 trucks that were still sitting outside borders, waiting to get in, waiting to be inspected. As of last week, there had been 111 rejections of trucks that registered. That had been more than in any other recorded period. So we're still seeing this chokehold of not enough getting in and not allowing us to do our full jobs despite the widespread attention.
So, it seems periodically throughout this crisis, there have been moments that kind of galvanized Western audiences. One I would point to was the deaths of several members of the World Central Kitchen staff last year. And in the wake of those incidents, the response by at least the United States under the Biden administration then, and potentially now under the Trump administration, and by Israel, has been to try to treat this as a opportunity to improve like the logistics of getting aid into Gaza. So for example, we saw like airdrops these last couple days, but fundamentally this is not, and this is something I've made the point of saying over and over again, this is not like a logistical challenge, it's a political one, that the ultimate way to resolve the humanitarian crisis in Gaza is to have Israel let more aid into Gaza. That is how it is solved. It's not solved through logistical improvements at the margins. And, I'm wondering just the magnitude of this famine and starvation crisis might at once and for all become like the political moment here that inspires people to actually, treat this as a political problem to be solved, not a logistical challenge to figure out.
It's entirely a political problem. I agree with you 200% on that. These are not logistics issues. This is not a lack of access. This is a will issue. And it's not just Israel letting things in, it's also giving the space and the permission and the room, the safety to distribute those food items as well. By choking off the normal UN distribution system that was coordinated by the UN, where we had 400 points, to really insisting that everything go through this one mechanism, really choked off our ability. Not only is the food not getting in, but then our ability to safely deliver it. And the only way to make that safer is to really flood the zone with food. Right now, it's not safe because people feel like every truck that comes in is their last chance to get a meal. So, if you accept there might be some criminal bad actors, for the most part now, we're just seeing hungry people. We've also, in this environment, had a lot of warehouse capacity has been destroyed in this war effort as well. The reason that we're calling for a ceasefire is that the level of military activity has made it such that it's almost impossible to distribute food. And the lack of food coming in has also made it really dangerous for us to do the work once it's in. So we need everything open and we need the zone to be flooded. And I think what's been most devastating to me personally is that there is this awareness that this is a problem. Every day more people die. The Gaza Health Ministry is reporting that 6 people died overnight of hunger issues, right? So it's a political solution, but despite the fact that there are negotiations, you still have to open up the zone and let food in. It feels like it's just been more delay after delay, or it's been talk of something with no real tangible action. And I think that that's the part that's just even more difficult to wrap my arms around right now.
Having sadly covered other famines around the world over the course of my career, one thing that always sort of happens is that they get exponentially worse very quickly. By the time a famine is declared, it means that lots of people are dying from starvation and that under five deaths from acute malnutrition are already above a certain threshold. And it's important to remind people that, famine just doesn't mean like there's not a lot of food. It's a very sort of quantitative threshold that once crossed means that a lot of people are already dying from lack of food. And the humanitarian situation over the last week has not gotten remarkably better in a way that would prevent lots of people from dying from lack of food. So I would only imagine that over the next days and weeks, we are going to be once again seeing this onslaught of images of emaciated children, of people dying of starvation. And it'll only get worse and worse and worse, and more people will die.
And an acceleration of death rates, exactly just what you said. And, for some people, it's already too late, right? Like once you reach a certain threshold, it's really hard for your body to come back. And also just the therapeutic foods we need and the medical supplies to help people, those that are on the brink of death. And it's been really heartbreaking. Like the food is there. It's waiting at borders. It is there. Just let us do our jobs.
So over the last week, I have noticed at least a little bit of a change of how certain actors are talking about this situation. I think partly inspired by the recognition of famine in Gaza. You saw France, for example, announce that it will recognize the state of Palestine. Other countries may soon be on board. You saw Donald Trump say explicitly, that kids are starving. I'm wondering to what extent you see this as a potential opportunity for there to be a political tipping point in the wake of this crisis.
We don't take positions on the exact pressure that's being demanded, but anything that applies pressure for the humanitarian system to be allowed to operate and for food access to come, we welcome it. And also, we understand that some nations too have felt in the absence of those things happening to do airdrops, but we just encourage people to keep putting the pressure on to allow food in and to allow access and to know that we need some ceasefire or something to safely deliver food. So I fear that people talking about a political solution is just delaying that. And I think people need to apply pressure for the political solution and for the access. There's no scenario where it's okay to let more civilians starve and live in food deprivation, or to let more hostages starve and live in food deprivation. That there's no scenario where that's okay while they continue to work out a solution.
So earlier you mentioned that Mercy Corps helps manage clean water in Gaza, including through, desalination plants. We're talking a lot about food. Can you talk about the water situation a little bit and how water and food interact in humanitarian crisis like this?
The water situation has been dire. Like I said, from day one, there's been a siege on the actual water that's flowing into the pipes. And on top of that, there has been a lot of destruction of water infrastructure. 96% of households in the Strip are reporting that they have severely limited access to water. So what that means, like on a practical level, is every day a woman has to decide, do I have a glass of water? Do I cook with water? Do I wash my hands? Do I give my child a bath? Like that kind of water scarcity is felt and very real for 96% of the population. On top of that, there is a really terrible open sewage situation. I had a colleague report seeing a little girl like standing in sewage water trying to get water from a tap. And what they tell us about is visiting households where everyone has like a skin infection or some other things. And all that is just lack of clean water that causes all these other illnesses and leaves people vulnerable. So it is this cycle of things that are difficult for people to escape. And in a humanitarian setting, one of the things that the IPC report mentioned is that in the food baskets that the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is giving out, some of these meals are not ready to eat, and some of them require water to cook, pasta or rice or anything. And so that means it's a food basket that's not accessible, that still isn't working for people. And so that lack of clean water, it's going to contribute to increased mortality from the hunger. And it makes people a lot more vulnerable to other things. And, the other compounding factor, then we get to the availability of clean water, is the fact that these water plants require fuel to operate. And that's another thing that is a very scarce commodity to be found in the Strip right now.
So, in the coming days or even weeks, are there indicators that you'll be looking towards that will suggest to you how, on the one hand, dire this may get if the zone isn't flooded with aid? As you mentioned earlier, the problem here, as it has always been, is that there's just not enough aid being let through. And when aid is being let through, these trucks are often swarmed by people. So the solution here is to get a lot of aid through so people don't feel like it's their last opportunity for a meal. If that scenario does not unfold in the coming days, what do you expect?
The indicators we're already seeing are that things are accelerating just as we expect them to. So in the first 2 weeks of July, the number of people that were admitted to health facilities for treatment of acute malnutrition for those first 2 weeks of July was the same as the entire month of June. So you're already seeing that acceleration happen. Unfortunately, I think we're going to start seeing some acceleration in death rates, but we will definitely see more and more people reporting to hospitals with acute malnutrition that needs to be medically treated.
Jada, we'll have to leave it there, but I think your message was pretty clear.
Thank you so much for continuing to bring attention to this.
Thanks for listening to Global Dispatches. The show is produced by me, Mark Leon Goldberg. It is edited and mixed by Levi Sharp. If you are listening on Apple Podcasts, make sure to follow the show and enable automatic downloads to get new episodes as soon as they're released. On Spotify, tap the bell icon to get a notification when we publish new episodes. And of course, please visit globaldispatches.org to get on our free mailing list, get in touch with me, and access our full archive. Thank you.